Now, they had 3 full-time servants to answer the door, clean a dish, answer the phone, and she still went for that phone. So she hits number 1 and she goes, "Hello?" And all of a sudden, her whole tone changes, and she goes, "Oh, hello, Mr. President. Hold on, I'll get him for you."
It's very brightly colored and it's very loud, and it's fun for a while.
We want to be free to do what we want to do.
Muhammad Ali and Sonny Barker, President of the whole thing.
This is 109.5. Hey, Tim, how you doing? Good morning.
I'm doing well, thank you.
Well, I say
good evening here.
Yeah.
Good morning to you.
Exactly. So, yeah, good to meet you. So, and,
I appreciate your taking the time to have me as a guest. I really do. So,
yeah, no, good. I've had a few writers on, and actually, before I do a disservice to introducing you, why don't you just give us a little bit of background on yourself, what you do, and then we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts of it.
Okay, well, I've had like 2 distinct lives, maybe 3. I graduated college as a physical education major, and for 3 years I taught as a phys ed teacher and a coach. And then while I was working on my master's, and this is all part of the book I wrote, as I was working on my master's, I got hired at a university, and through there had a bunch of opportunities, one of which was to become a private fitness trainer in the Hamptons, which we'll get into in a minute. And then the second part of my life, I went back into teaching, and I taught a total of 40 years. Loved every minute of it. Had a lot of great times. Met a lot of cool kids that I still stay in touch with today. I retired in 2015, and now I do commercials. I'm an actor who does some film, but my niche is really in commercials. So I have the beard for a part on a feature film that I'm shooting in August. I have the role of the prosecutor. Tomorrow I have an audition for a lottery ad in Florida. So I do a lot of different things.
Awesome. I wondered, the commercial space used to be booming. It's still, I don't know what it's like in America, obviously, with the way that social media has changed things. And are these TV ads that you do typically? When
I do mostly TV. I've done some national ads, a lot of regional ads. Yeah. Last week I shot a what you'd call a local ad, just like 3 towns for a CPA in down in Punta Gorda. But I take any job. Nothing's too big or too small. I just enjoy it. I learn with every job I'm on. So it's a great way in retirement. You don't work every day, but you work enough to pay some bills. So.
It sounds like a really good retirement plan. How long ago? How long have you been retired? Like when was the fitness business? How long are you out of that? You look like you're pretty fit still, so you obviously keep it up.
Yeah. I the book is set in 1987, one summer, but I worked as a private trainer from about 80 to, let's say, 90. Okay. And then I went back into teaching in 92 and retired in 2015.
Cool. I got a personal trainer who's still a personal trainer joining on the next podcast, so it's kind of timely. Nice segue into that podcast, but
wait till he hears my story. He may have a few of his own.
Well, talk to us about the book. Do you want to? Let's dive straight into the book, and well, before you talk to us about the plot, is the book? It's a novel. Is it based on truth?
Yeah, it's
most people. Yeah, go for it.
Well, no, I couldn't do that. Yeah, it's a fictional novel, quote unquote. No, but seriously, it's a fictional novel. And I think most writers, I only speak for myself, but I think most writers write about things they know about. Like if you're a sailor, you write something about sailing. If you're a pilot, you work airplanes into it. So what I did was I worked in the aspect of private fitness training. And it gave an inside view of what goes on in these super rich houses where people, not all of them, but a number of them have a sense of entitlement.
Yeah.
And what I did was I told the story and connected the people. You don't want me getting into the plot, but I connected the people. But what the book's really about is human nature. It's about class differences and attitudes both within class and those who aren't like us,
Yeah.
And then it's about human nature. It's about the temptations we face. How do we handle those? And what are the consequences of our actions? Not everybody's going to make perfect choices all the time, but every choice you make has a consequence. And then the other part of it is, what do you do if you get a second chance? What do you do if you get a do-over? Do you learn from your mistakes? Do you move forward? Are you able to forget the past, or at least learn from the past and move on? So that's what the book's about. And I tried to do it in a way that took some truth, so it's believable, but I mixed it with fiction. I changed all the names of the characters, the restaurants, people, so that I combined certain people to be a type of person. And I told a story. And what I would hope is people are entertained. I hope they're engaged. I hope I evoked emotion when they read it. Sometimes you're going to love the protagonist. Sometimes you're going to be like, wow, I can't believe he did that. Did he really need to do that? Other times you're going to cry. And other times you're going to be really angry at him. But I think by the time the book is over, everything comes full circle. And I think people can relate to some decisions they made in their own life. So the last part is, I hope people reflect on their own lives after reading the book. And they look at other people with maybe some more empathy. Do we give people a second chance, or do we just write them off? So those are, and I think I got it pretty close to being right, because that's what a lot of the reviews say. It's a page turner. It made me think. I didn't see things happening, but it could be all too true. And that was my goal in writing a book.
Awesome. So it sounds like a fascinating read, and very character driven, and those characters taken from, maybe not true, but taken from true experiences and people you came into contact with, like years ago when you were doing personal training.
Right.
And how was that? How was that process of kind of digging into old memories? I know it's interesting because you presumably were reflecting on times a few decades ago in terms of the characters that you were bringing into the story.
Well, I was very young then. I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And I grew up north of New York City. I know a lot of your listeners are in Thailand and England and Australia, but they probably know where New York is. So I grew up in a very wealthy county north of New York, but the town I grew up in was not wealthy at all. We were a very blue-collar town. In the summer, I lifeguarded through high school and college, and I was around other people my age who were very rich. But at the time, I wasn't mature enough to realize there was a difference. And I mean, we all got along, but there were moments, and looking back now, I realized I could go to their parties, but I'd never be one of them, if you get what I'm saying. So now fast forward, I'm in the Hamptons, and these people are uber rich. And I mean, I'll tell you one quick story just to drive the point home. I'm exercising a woman one time. We're up in her bedroom. That's a problem right there. And her bedrooms had probably the size of half my house. And back then you had push button phones. You didn't have cell phones, or if you did, they were big boxes. So her husband's cheating on her. She knows it. I know it. Everybody pretty much knows it. And the phone rings while we're exercising. And she shoots off the floor and she hits number one because she thinks it's the girlfriend calling while she's in an exercise session. Now, they had 3 full-time servants to answer the door, clean a dish, answer the phone, and she still went for that phone. So she hits number one and she goes, hello? And all of a sudden, her whole tone changes and she goes, oh, hello, Mr. President. Hold on, I'll get him for you. So she hits number two, and I'll use your name. I won't use the husband's name. And she goes, Matthew, Ronnie's on line one. So it was Reagan calling. So these are the types of people I'm dealing with. And what I tried to do was, there's basically several types of people out there. There's people like me who live there year round, who are in the service business, who just find a way to survive and make a living and get by. And it can be a great life. I'm not saying you live poor. But then you have the people who are trust fund people. Their families have made tons of money. And quite truthfully, it's remarkable half of them can hang on to the money because they drink too much. They don't really do anything productive for society, but they have an attitude and a sense of entitlement. So I took all those types of people and I made them the Stanwicks. Then I took the people like the lady I'm just describing, and they're the types that have to be seen at every party. They're CEOs, corporate heads, hedge fund raiders. They have to be at every party. They have to get their picture in Elle magazine or W. I don't think they're even in business anymore. But it was like, no matter what's going on in your personal life, no matter how bad it is, no matter how bad your husband's disrespecting you, when you go out that door to a cocktail party, everything is wonderful. Mm-hmm. And then you had some other people who were just normal people, even though they were wealthy. And so I made them a smattering of characters. And what I did was I had them all interact in a manner that I could drive a plot line.
Yeah.
And Hunter, who's the protagonist, he's an observer. So he just watches this all. Back in 87, discos were in. Hunter wasn't going to them. Hunter kept his nose clean. Cocaine was everywhere. It was the drug of choice. AIDS was running rampant. It was kind of like COVID. People didn't know what to do with it. There was a lot of misinformation, but people in the gay community out in the Hamptons, and there are a lot of them there even today, they were dying off. It was a real epidemic. So it was crazy times, and I strung it all together. I addressed all those issues, and I did something else unique, but I think it works well. I didn't tell the story from the first person or the third person. What I did was I had a woman who Hunter, and I don't want to give the story away, Hunter knew her when she was a young girl and he was a young adult. And they always liked each other, not in a weird way, but they just got along well. He found humor in her and she thought he was really cool. And so years later, she becomes an editor who takes on book projects, and he gets involved in something that's really notable. And she can't believe that he would be involved with this. And she seeks him out, and they finally do hook up and meet. I don't mean hook up in that sense. They meet.
Yep.
And he tells his story to her, and she tells the story to the reader. So she's kind of a liaison between the reader and the protagonist, and it works well. At times you think you're actually there and it's happening, and other times she's relaying it to you, asking the same questions you would ask, like, why did he do that? Or I can't believe that actually happened. So some facts, some fiction, and I think a good tale.
It sounds, I can see why, going back to the beginning of what you were saying there, I can see why you've had to change some names then when you've got presidents on phones and things
yeah,
like that.
well, and I didn't want to hurt anybody. I didn't write the book to be mean, but I have been fortunate. I met a lot of TV, movie personalities. The health club where I met this woman is a huge resort on the east end of Long Island. At the time, it was one of the 6 top spas in the world. It was like Baden-Baden and Greenbrier, and it was owned by the mob. So there were some interesting things that happened there. And the reason the mob would go there and meet and have their meetings was because you couldn't put a hit on. There's no way out.
Right.
Everything is one lane each way. So it's kind of a safe haven. One day I'm having lunch with my friend Vince, and this isn't in the book because I'm not going down that road, but Paulie Castellano is having lunch across the dining room with a group of other people. And I get home that night and turn the news on, and the lead story is Paulie Castellano is gunned down outside Sparks.
Wow.
About 2 weeks before Christmas, going into Sparks' restaurant to have dinner. And sitting across the street watching the whole thing are two mafias. One's a Don that you would know. So I was around really interesting people at a young, impressionable age. And it was interesting, but they weren't the people with money. The people with money were the people you never heard of, who had a house in Palm Beach, had a house in East Hampton or Southampton, people who had a house in Europe and lived in Sutton Place in Manhattan or Central Park West. So it was a mix, and I took it all in. I survived. I just bought drip stocks in East Hampton real estate. I didn't snort it away and party it away, but I tucked it away because you see things you can't unsee. And so I never told people stories and mentioned names, but when I tell once in a while a story, they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, that's crazy." And I'd go, "Oh yeah." And they'd be like, "You should write a book." So I did.
Cool. I can see why you did it as a novel, not a memoir as well, then, because it would have been tricky as a memoir in terms of.
Yeah, but part of it, I mean, the beginning of the book is me, how I got into doing it. And then some of that becomes, more fictional as we move on. So.
Cool. I'm interested to hear just listening to you talk about the 80s and the difference between, kind of the wealth and the poor and the different classes. How do you see it today? I mean, a lot of what you said there, I think people can reflect on of today's society. Do you see it as the same, just in different form, or how do you see society's changed in terms of?
I don't think it really has that much. I think over the years, groups of people try to be more open, try to change, try to, talk about new ideas and social justice and this and that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I don't think we've changed that much. I think things have gotten better for certain groups of people, but again, they're held at arm's length.
Yeah.
And, I laugh when I hear these people talk about, oh, we've got to let everybody in and we've got to be friendly to everybody and love everybody and stuff. And the first thing they do when they build a house is they put a wall up and they put a big gate at the front. So it's kind of hypocritical. And, they may be polite to you, but they're never really going to let you in. So I don't think all that much has changed. COVID was the new AIDS. Something else will come along. We get all misinformation on it. Depending on, I don't feel like I have any control over what's going on with government in my life. It's all about power. They don't care about us. They care about their power, their control. They're getting wealthier. And, maybe that sounds cynical, but that's how I see it, no matter which side of the fence you're on.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you. And I asked the question because obviously I was around in the 80s, but a lot younger probably. And I was a kid at school, really. But I think the big difference today is just the exposure to information and the ability to engage. It's like we didn't have the internet growing up. And that's the only, doesn't mean the people are necessarily different, but I'm like, wow, what was going on when there was no internet? We just didn't have, we had the mainstream media in a different form in broadsheets, but it, yeah, I just think
now it's immediate. It's immediate, it's and with AI, it's only going to get worse because you don't know what's real and what's not real and stuff. Kind of crazy.
Well, and I won't go too far off topic on it actually, but maybe AI is a good segue to come back because I did want to ask you about your writing process, and not suggesting that you use AI, but it's very interesting how AI is integrating into writing. But what is your approach to writing? What is your creative process when you've sat down and wrote this book, have written other things? Do you have a structure you use? Do you have an approach? I know there are disciplined ways, but there are also very individual ways that people do it. So
that's a great question. And I'm writing another book now, sort of. What I do is I do a lot of thinking. So it doesn't look like I'm actually working. But when I'm running the beach in the morning or when I'm riding my bike, I never listen to music or anything like that. I just think, and things come into my head and I think about different stories. And then I come home and I write them down. And then what I do is I sit down at the computer and I start elaborating on each of those stories. And at some point, I have to connect them. And so what I do is basically I follow a very simple model I think a lot of authors do. And I don't necessarily do it in order, but I set a hook. You have to have a hook. You have to draw someone in. Then I need an event or a conflict that okay, now we've got confrontation. Then you let the momentum build, and it goes on a while until it reaches a crisis. And then the reader wants to know, okay, wow, which way is it going to go? So the fifth step is you have a climax, and then you have resolution. What happens after that? And that's kind of, they each went their own way, or somebody passed, or whatever. So I don't know if I write like other people, but what I do is I do a lot of thinking. Then I start putting stuff down. One thing I started doing is I'll dictate into the computer, and because of the way I talk, it comes out really messed up. But then I'll go back and I'll correct it. But I don't use any AI. And I was speaking at a book club once, and a woman asked me, "Did you use any AI?" And I said, "Listen, you're lucky I can turn the computer on." Really, I said, "Yeah, let alone go down that road." But the other thing I do is I read a lot of novels. I love James Lee Burke, John Sanford, Nelson DeMille, and some older people I read like Philip Craig and Dominic Dunn, and Lawrence Sanders wrote about Cape Cod people, Palm Beach people, people with money. And so I'm intrigued by those stories, and I think they really influence me. So by reading a lot, you think a lot. What you have to be careful of is I don't read a lot when I'm actually writing, because I don't want to read something and work it into my tale.
Yeah.
That's like a fine line, you've got to think of it yourself. So, but I've read over the years, I've read so many books and novels that I think I can look at it. I know what's right, sounds right, what's plausible. You can't just bring somebody in the last chapter and turn the whole table. It has to be believable to the reader, has to be plausible. So, but that's my process. So it takes me a while. I use a spiral notebook to take notes and stuff. Then I transfer it to the computer. Then I start cleaning it up. I start going through an edit check on it. And what I did with this book, and I would do it with any book, is when I was all done and thought I was done, you're never done, but when I thought I was done, I got an editor who does that for a living to read the book. And she was tough, and I didn't really know her. I knew her to say hi to, but I wasn't really friendly with her. We're more friendly now. And she was hard. She was an ex-English teacher, and I never liked English class. I used to go in there and get fever sweats because they were tough, and I was lost, and it just wasn't good. And she really got into the book. I mean, she was sending me emails at like 2:30 in the morning. So I'd wake up in the morning, she had, looked at it. The grammar was surprisingly good. That kind of, I think, shocked her, the use of the commas and colons and things like that. And she'd give me names like the Oxford comma. And I'm like, I don't really care what you call it. Do we just use it consistently? Do I have it right? So anyway, she went through that. And she had a couple of really great suggestions for plot changes or whatever, or cutting down some sentences and verbiage, making it tighter. And then what she did is she uses 4 beta readers who I did not know. And these people read any and anything, and they just love to read. So one was an old woman, and there's some spicy scenes in this book. So I was like, oh, man, are you kidding me? And the old woman reads it. She was wonderful. And she says, boy, have I lived a sheltered life, but I loved reading about it. It was really exciting. So I said, okay, that's a win. Another woman read it and she said, I can't get through the book. I hate this stuff. I hate rich people, reading about rich people who, do nasty things to others. She goes, I don't care about this. And that's fine, because you're not going to please everybody who reads a book. Not everybody who reads a book is going to love that book. Another guy read it. He was in his 70s. He couldn't put it down. He read it in a day and a half. So I thought that was good, because here I have a female, here I have a male. And they're older, so I think they could relate back to those times maybe, kind of was like a flashback for them. And then I had another woman read it, and she suggested we change the order of 3 chapters at the beginning of the book. 3 of the first 5 chapters. I didn't have to rewrite them per se, just maybe a sentence or 2, but change the order. And oh my gosh, it was a game changer. Mm-hmm. It really set the hook. It made it run smoother. And that was gold. So I think as a writer, you have to be willing to have thick skin. You have to be willing to take criticism. You have to be able to like when she'd come to me with ideas, I'd step back. I'd try to see it from her perspective. I didn't always go with everything she did, but we talked it out and probably reached a compromise on some things. And some things I said, oh, you're absolutely right. I just didn't look at it that way. So it was give and take, and it was quite the process. But I think that's important for a writer to understand that you need help and be open to that. And what we talked about earlier in the show with doing the commercials and all, with all the auditions I do and all the rejections I get, you develop thick skin. So that carries over into other aspects too. I don't personalize stuff. I just look at it from they're trying to help me.
Honestly, I think that's great advice, not just for writing. I think for any creative process, it's a hard thing to learn, but I spent about 7 years trying to get a movie made, and going through that process, you just realize the frustration and the rejection. You got to basically take it all as good advice, and where's the next step? Where's this taking you to? It's part of the creative process, really. If it gets you down, you end up probably taking the wrong corner.
Yeah, well, it's funny you said that, because that's what my goal with the book is to get it turned into either a streaming network series. If you think of let me rephrase that. If you think of the morning show on Apple Plus TV, it's really about abuse of power in a newsroom. He treated everybody like crap. He hit on all the women. He was the star. He could do whatever he wanted. It's really about Matt Lauer. And Matt Lauer, where does he live? He lives in the Hamptons. So he lives in the town I'm writing about, because that's the type of person who lives there. It's kind of also and I set the first scene, I guess, first chapter early in the book. The woman that sets the whole thing up, one of Hunter's ex-clients, lives on Billionaire Row in Palm Beach. That's where Trump lives. That's where James Patterson lives. That's where the other guy lived. I can't think of his name right now, that got caught up in all that sex stuff. Jeffrey Epstein. Yeah. So you may not like the story, but it's an interesting story, and people don't admit it, but they try to read as much as they can about that stuff. In fact, Patterson wrote a book called Filthy Rich, which is about Jeffrey Epstein. And so interestingly, the book, people from the New York area, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, we call that the tri-state area, they would tell me, Tim, you have these characters spot on. Man, you nailed it. But people from the Midwest, who are far more polite than us New Yorkers, they don't curse. They're like, Holy Mother of Minnie Pearl. They don't roll the same way. They look at some of the stuff in the book and they think it's disgusting. They're like, oh my God, that's awful. And I'm like, well, yeah, it is awful, but it's also real. This stuff is out there and this stuff is happening. And I think 50 Shades of Grey kind of showed people that, people don't you'll never find someone who goes, I love 50 Shades of Grey, but it's one of the largest selling books of all times. And, the writer, she got rejected from every major publisher. She published it on Amazon and it became, I think, a #1 bestseller. So you just never know. So anyway, I wrote the book because it gives me protection with copyright of intellectual property. It shows I can do a body of work. And now with my connections through film and all, I'm trying to get it turned into a movie. But it's difficult, as you well know.
Oh, it's tough. And actually, I mean, I think you're onto something. I haven't read the book, but just the way you communicate the content and the story within it, it sounds like that there's plenty of hooks in there. I do wonder whether, the real hunger now is these kind of miniseries, right? I mean, I think the last 10 years,
Right.
It's just, for me personally, I'll always looking for what's the next miniseries that for certain types of content, if
Right.
there's a lot of good stories, juicy stories that can run through a kind of 5, 6, 7, 8 part series.
Right.
There's
I think you could drag this out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that gives you book 2 and series 2, and
Yeah, then you win both ends. But TV and movie has definitely changed.
Yeah.
And if you read the reviews of people who've read the book, a number of people in Barnes and Nobles or Goodreads or Amazon have said, I think it would make for a good movie or streaming. So I was happy to hear that. Cool. Because they're thinking the way I'm thinking, But I don't think people realize all these books that are sent out to agents, maybe 1% get accepted. Then the agent sends it to all these publishers, maybe 1% gets accepted. And it's the same with the movie business. And then what's really frustrating is you look at some of these movies they do make, and you're like, how can they make that and not be interested in this? But,
I do wonder whether the problem with, I agree with you. I mean, I'm like a bit of a broken record to my wife when I'm moaning constantly about this, but I also think because of the streaming channel, well, like the Netflix purpose-made content now, I think they churn out their own content, and a lot of the time it's just not good. And the stuff that does really well is typically something they bring in and buy. But the problem is, they've got this kind of cookie cutter process of putting out another film or another, and they are trash, especially the movies. I mean, if I go and scroll through the latest movies that are Netflix, and I don't know any of the actors, and I'm not knocking their acting ability, and it doesn't always take a known actor, but the moment you turn it on, you're just like, within 10 minutes, it's just a weak plot.
Cookie cutter.
It's a weak plot. The actors are not great. But I think they have this kind of buffer content that they're churning out in between the stuff that really keeps you on there, And it's kind of what happened with the music industry in the 80s. I don't know if this is a UK phenomenon, but the Stock Aitken and Waterman, there was kind of, it was the 90s really when they started churning out pop songs, and it just kind of became really dull for a while. But what usually happens with that is you get this kind of rebuttal of really great creativity that comes afterwards. And I'm hoping that we're kind of getting through that. It feels like we've not had my wife is, she's Thai, and she's 10 years younger, and she hasn't watched a lot of the movies I watched in the 90s. And she would never normally put them on, but I put them on, always enjoys them. Like if we watch older movies, kind of late 80s through to 2000, there's a bunch of good movies made, and we try and watch new stuff, and she's like, oh, there's no depth to the plot, and you can see it. But what I'm hoping is we're starting to see stuff come good again. So usually it's a generational thing, and the next generation reacts and comes out with good content.
It's tough when you're creating, because we talked about the thick skin, but a lot of creative people are very insecure. There's a reason for that. It's because you're always on a slippery slope, and you put your heart and yourself out there, and not everyone's going to love what you do. But what I try to do is, if somebody criticizes me, I try to take something from that. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can. And so if you learn and you keep going, and, eventually you'll get it right, or you'll get enough people who like it. And if nothing else, I'm at a point in life now where it makes me happy doing these things. So probably at the end of the day, that's what's most important,
Awesome. Sounds
Someplace you have to arrive. I'm getting close. I'm not there, but I'm getting there.
cool.
So,
Sounds like a good
yeah.
a good draw to an ending point. Was there anything I didn't ask that you'd like to share before? Obviously, we share your book and stuff.
No, I
behind
think.
you and-
Yeah, I think what I just like to say is you don't have to be from New York or the Hamptons to love the book. It's really about social class structure, as I talked about in Human Nature. I think it's a quick read. That seems to be what people say. It's a page turner. It builds as the book goes. It's called Behind the Hedgerows. They can buy it. I don't even want to say. I would suggest they go to their independent bookstore, but you can buy it on Amazon, and I know Amazon UK carries it.
Cool.
And people can have, if they want a good laugh,
There you go.
I don't know
See
if
your-
you
see
see,
your
go to
web-
my website here. I
Cool.
know you've looked at it because you're the only one I know from Thailand, and you went on a couple of times.
I
So
did, yeah.
what'll happen, this is really cool. After I deal with you tonight and you eventually drop this, I'm going to get hits from all over the world. That's pretty cool to see. So it's www.timothykentsmith.net. It sounds stuffy. People call me Tim. I go by Tim, but if you look Tim Smith up on social media, there's like 8,000 people. So Timothy Kent Smith narrows it down to 3.
Cool.
And one's a doctor. The other one I don't know. And then there's me. So check the website out. Order the book. You can order it directly from the publisher. If you're out of the U.S., it might not work as well. I don't know, but ask for it, and I'd appreciate anybody who buys it. And if you do read it, please review it. That's huge. Authors need reviews. So thank you very much for having me on tonight.
Yeah, my pleasure,
Appreciate
Tim.
it.
I will leave, for anyone watching or listening, I'll leave those links in the speaker notes,
Okay.
links to your book.
Yeah.
And it's been a real pleasure meeting. And apologies, I haven't read your book, and we only met probably online a week ago through the website where I connect with people. But I get it. I get like one author a week reach out for some reason in the last few weeks. So, but yeah, I will read it. I will order it and read it. It sounds like a good read, and I will.
Well,
look
keep
forward to
doing
that.
what you're doing. Your podcasts are interesting, and you're a great host because you ask the right questions and you're easy to talk with. So
Cool.
thank you
Cheers.
so much.
I appreciate it, Tim. Have a good evening.
Okay, you too. Thanks, Matthew.
To be free to do what we
The
want
two
to
were
do.
Muhammad Ali and Sonny Barker, the president of the Hells Angels.
This is 1095